Again, I'm Max from the RIPE NCC. I'm the IPv6 program manager. I am part of the training services team, which actually is changing name into learning and development. I'm presenting today with Hisham. I'll hand the microphone to him in a moment, but I just wanted to create a connection between the previous presentation. So Nicole was saying this IPv6 is happening, and we have identified such a need, mostly the external relations team. And so this is a presentation about some work we're doing to make life easier for operators and for people who actually want to do something, to document best practices and show how others have done it, how the pioneers have done it even years ago, and to show what the problems could be. So,
yeah. Hello, good morning everyone. Dobar dan. I'm Hisham Ibrahim, and to echo what Max was just saying, we couldn't have asked for a better introduction than the one that Nicole has actually given with her keynote, so thank you for that. You made our lives a lot easier. Because she set the scene very nicely about what was happening over time, and the question was, do you need IP version 6? And in this talk, we're going to highlight that we actually see a lot more demand for IP version 6 only now. And you're going to be seeing this in a second. So, yeah, here's the clicker. Yeah, there it is. So, yes, so one of the things that she was mentioning when she was talking was the mobile, right? And just with a quick show of hands, how many mobile operators do we have in the room? Can you, yeah? Okay. Well, not that many, but here's the thing. What we've been seeing is that more and more, we're getting invited to meetings with mobile operators that ask us to come visit them in their premise and talk about IP version 6 deployments. And their IP version 6 deployment can be, and if you remember the nice cartoon she had up there, could be the dual stack one, the hybrid car that she had up there, that they want to do both IP version 4 and IP version 6, or the nice electric car that she showed down there, which is the IP version 6 only. And a lot of them are moving towards that IP version 6 only, single stack IP version 6. You heard her mention that you have to provision for both. If you're doing both IP version 4 and IP version 6, you need to have a lot of IP version 4 addresses to provide if you're doing both IP version 4 and IP version 6. And this is why mobile operators specifically, for the reasons she gave about security, but also for the lack of IP version 4, and even with CGN and CGNAT, it's not scaling fast enough for countries that have millions and millions of subscribers over mobile. So we definitely see a trend for mobile operators that want to go to single stack IP version 6. The problem is, they couldn't find as good documentation for moving as a mobile operator towards IP version 6 as you can find as a network operator. And in the essence, the technology is pretty much the same, and this is how we as techies would look at this. You know, it's basically an address protocol, this is how you do this, and it's fine. But because there's different in terminologies, there's difference in way of thinking, there's not that much documentation out there, which led us to discover, and Max is going to emphasize this in a second, that they have very different approaches. It kind of feels like we went back in time to the bits that Nicole was mentioning, back in 2011 and 2012, when every operator was reinventing the wheel all over again for on the network level. We're seeing this now happening on the mobile level. So basically what we did was we tried to figure out, okay, so who's doing what, right? So we took this first to Max. He's the IP version 6 program manager. We discussed this with him at length. There was work he was already working on, and there was work done by his predecessor, Natalie, who's in the room as well, on getting connections with the mobile operators. Hi, Natalie. And yes, and we built on that. So we started building lists to see, you know, who's doing what, who's doing dual stack, who's doing single stack, and we started doing contacting them and doing a bunch of questionnaires, interviews, and understanding what they have. And Max is going to highlight some of them, and then I'm going to join him again for some Q&A.
Yeah. So we actually contacted some of them, some operators. We got to meet with them, have a Skype call, or also an interview on site. and we discussed with them what issues they found. So we found that basically they had quite the same issues, all of them. They identified the same set of problems. So here is a quick recap of what we found out and what will be put into the document that we're working on together with other experts in the field. So the preparation work. Many of them prepared a proof of concept, a network, but the problem is for preparing this, getting different parts of the company involved. You know, in a mobile network, you have people who only deal with the radio part, and they have to be involved as well for IPv6 because this work is going to involve how the handsets will behave, and then you have to tell them that you have to distinguish which kind of handsets, which will come in the next slide. But also, there's a part that we often overlook, especially from our side, because we give for granted that the allocation that you will get will be enough. But for a mobile operator with a huge number of customers, that's not the case. So receiving an allocation that will satisfy your use cases might be challenging, and that's where, that's where we can also provide even more help in this case. Then, what I mentioned is the vendor support. So figuring out what can be done with a certain vendor, with Android, what cannot be done with Apple. So the issues that you find with the handsets and the different families. We found out operators that would identify the type of handsets and then direct them to different APNs or different parts of their network because they wanted to only deal with one of them. Maybe some wanted to only deal with iOS being IPv6, and then Android for the moment, let's leave it out of the equation. And then also how to deal with the rest of the infrastructure, with the mobile part, with the radio part, with the routing side. So we identified some issues here that we're going to discuss. And then we found out this was interesting, different approaches in how to handle APNs. An APN is basically where your phone will connect to the network. And then we've seen some operators saying, no, I do single APN because that's cheaper, and then I'll put everyone in there, and then I'll do my I'll distinguish the cases at the routing level. So I will deal with them in my rest of the network. Well, others prefer to differentiate the users based on the APNs. Why is this important to notice? Because it's also an approach that requires money. Because some operators, they don't buy the equipment, but they lease it from the vendors. And the vendors charge for all the features. So having multiple APNs can be more expensive. But then what can you do if you do something like this? You can differentiate the business users on one APN, and then you can keep them on IPv4 only, or give them a dedicated IPv6 configuration. You can move, we've heard about an operator that would actually move the gamers when they complained about, I have bad connectivity towards my destination. They would move them to a dedicated APN just for gamers, for example. And they had a whole list. While in other places, this is not doable because that would be too expensive. So this is also a part that needs to be taken into account, because if you run multiple APNs, you can decide to do a phased approach to moving everyone to IPv6. You can get some of the customers, move them to a new APN with IPv6, leave the old ones on IPv4 only, and then figure out the issues as you go. And then Hisham mentioned there can be a dual stacked approach, which is not really the most favorable one, standing by what the operators told us. While many of them decided to go for either NAT64 with DNS64, which involves a whole set of issues, and then others just went for 464 XLAT, no DNS64. So it's an approach that gives you more flexibility in terms of what you provide for the users. Then this was the trickiest part, billing, because everyone wants to be paid. But there was a time where, or there still is for many operators, where software wouldn't support IPv6. So even when you were exchanging the CDRs with other operators to go through what's it called, the clearinghouses to get paid, they would not take into account, the software would not take IPv6 into account. So there were stories of people roaming between countries, and when roaming is the next coming slide, roaming between countries and getting free data because the billing software would not support IPv6, so it was just not counting it in the CDRs, not counting it in the data that was providing for the billing in the end. So this needs to be taken into account. There are operators who just decided to go and upgrade the version of the billing software or get a new one. Others who found tricks, like creating hashes of the addresses and then putting the hashes in the CDRs or in the records so that everything would be fixed at the source. And this depends on the software you're running, but also depends on the money you have available to upgrade your software or the need to find a trick to make the software support IPv6. Then we go into roaming, because as I mentioned, roaming can be an issue. While your network might be IPv4 only, you will have users who roam into your network and will do IPv6, and will try to at least. So even here, we found that most of the operators decided to just disable IPv6 for the roaming users to make life easier for other roaming networks. Also for all the billing issues. I don't want my users to roam into another network where they'll generate traffic which should be billed, but I don't have any data to be able to bill them because the billing software for the other side doesn't support IPv6. So the approach was, and this is something I don't generally like to say, but it was, let's disable IPv6, let's stay on the safe side. And then it also depends on the kind of breakout you want to make. If you want to have a local breakout or a remote breakout, so if you want to handle addresses locally, or you want to basically tunnel everything back to the original operator. And then filtering. Filtering is not BGP per se, but it's filtering like many countries. I come from Italy, and there you also have regulations on filtering certain websites or certain content, and this needs to be achieved also for IPv6. And I know in many countries this has been a showstopper for IPv6, something that would delay implementation. We have plenty of examples for this. So consider the legal issues that might rise if you move to IPv6 in this case. It's getting better and better pretty much everywhere, but this is something that still needs to be taken into account. So after this, what are we going to do? We have started writing a document with a small pool of people. We hope in about a month to uncover it and uncover some of the content so that the community can have a look, review it, see if we are telling the truth or not. And then the idea is to give it over to the community so that there can be comments, there can be improvements all over the time. And then we're also going to get in touch with more and more operators because it has to be an ongoing effort to adapt to what is happening on the field. So we need to keep identifying key issues. So I think Shisham wants to add something. Yes.
Yeah. So like Max was saying, we started. I presented the idea at the BCOP meeting, at the last RIPE meeting, and Max will be presenting an update on the work at the coming up RIPE meeting in Reykjavik at the IPv6 working group. But as Max was pointing out, we do need that feedback from operators because as you can see, and this is why the BCOP is becoming more and more important, and this is why we identified this as something that we wanted to put cycles in, that there is no one approach that everybody's taking. It's exactly like Nicole was pointing out when it was back in 2010 and 11 where everybody was just going in their own direction, or even maybe even further beyond that. We're young enough to remember, not old enough to remember. We're young enough to remember those days. And we're seeing the same exact thing. And if you saw, Nicole showed the graph with IP version 6 numbers going up. If you know that from Google, there's a second tab that shows you the countries that have the highest IP version 6 penetration. And the ones that are the darkest, the ones that have the highest number of penetration, are actually the countries that went forward and did IP version 6 on mobile. So you see the US, you see India, you see Belgium. These countries that have now already have IP version 6 on mobile, this is what's going to make the difference. So whether you are an ISP that is not seeing much IP version 6 traffic, or you're a mobile operator that wants to do this for the reasons that we mentioned and more, IP version 6, because the last mile issue isn't an issue when it comes to mobile. It is an issue with fixed. How do you replace the CPEs, the cost that factors in? With mobile, you don't have that. And on that point, thank you very much, and we're happy to get questions. So, thank you.
Масsimiliano, Hisham, спасибо.
Max, Hisham, thank you very much. Are there any questions to my colleagues? Very well. It looks like at the moment we do not have any questions, but you know where to find them if you're a mobile operator and you would like to ask questions to my colleagues. If you have any doubts that you want to be dispelled, they are in the process of conducting a series of interviews with mobile operators. They would appreciate your feedback and any inputs that you might be willing to share with them. Thank you.